Prepare for a rude awakening.
Once we have the new moon of the Aviv barley, we then simply count 10 days, and that brings us to Passover. Very important if we're going to understand the Gospels, because this is the bracket to understand when Yeshua's ministry began and when his ministry was fulfilled. So we see the Passover lamb was selected on the 10th day of the month. It's inspected for 4 days. And then in the afternoon, the late afternoon, called even in Old King James English, that is when the Passover lambs, they are sacrificed on the afternoon of the 14th. They are put in the oven before sundown. And then when the sun sets, it is now the 15th day of the month. It is the high Sabbath of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It doesn't matter what day of the week it occurs on, it's always a high Sabbath or high rest day. Could be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it doesn't matter. Whenever the sun sets at the 15th, then after the sun sets and the lambs are finished roasting, the lambs are brought out of the oven and they are eaten with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. It is the Passover Seder. The Feast of Unleavened Bread begins. Now, sometime during this week, we will always have a weekly Sabbath. And at the end of the weekly Sabbath, as the sun sets, there is a prescribed rehearsal that we go through right after the sun sets every year that culminates the following morning on the first day of the week, Sunday morning, in which we present the first fruits of the barley harvest in the temple after the sun comes up the following day. And when we present the first fruits, at that point, we then will count 7 Sabbath days, and the day after the 7th Sabbath will be the 50th day, and that will be Shavuot, or it is the Feast of Weeks. The Greeks called it Pentecost, which it means the 50th day, but they were missing the point because it's really the counting of the 7 Sabbaths that is so important. And you'll see that in just a minute. So once we have the calendar blocked out, we are then going to add another line here on our calendar that is available to all of you. And this calendar, then this line here, you see that the line begins right in the middle of the block period. This line begins at midnight. This is the Pagan or Babylonian calendar that you are all so familiar with. Now, the reason why we put that in there is that while you're learning the biblical reckoning of time, if you ever lose track of what the date is, all you have to do is leave your house, walk down the street, and look for a pagan. When you find a pagan, ask them what the date is, then come back home, look at your calendar, look right above the pagan date, and there is the biblical date. It's like we have thought of everything on this calendar for you, okay? And if you have any questions, you can always call our office because our phone number is on the bottom of every single page of our calendar. So there's no need to go through any questions on that. So once you have the head of the year, then you know when Passover is going to be. When you know when the Feast of Unleavened Bread begins, and you know when it ends, then you're going to see all the details concerning the feast. Now, this is very important. It says, "You shall count unto you from the day after the weekly Sabbath during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, from the very day that you brought the wave offering, 7 complete Sabbaths." You count 7 complete Sabbaths. So, right here, from the day after the Feast of Unleavened Bread, from the day after the Sabbath, here is a Sabbath during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the very next day is the day of first fruits. From that day, we count 7 Sabbath days. And when we count 7 Sabbath days, the day after the 7th Sabbath, you shall number 50 days. And we offer a new meal offering unto Yahweh. And so from this day, we count 7 Sabbaths. and we come to the 49th day, or the 7th Sabbath. The following day is Shavuot. That is the Creator's reckoning of time, that every year he told us to do this. And every year as we do it, we are asking ourselves the question, why in the world are we doing this? We know that these are all prophetic shadow pictures of good things to come. We know that this is not one of the things that Yeshua fulfilled. He, in fact, ascended 10 days before this in the middle of nowhere. And so we always ask ourselves this question. And it says, we shall bring 2 wave loaves baked with leaven. They are the bikurim of the wheat harvest, the first fruits unto Yahweh. And that's what we do at Shavuot. Now, the counting of the 7 Sabbaths until Shavuot is a microcosm of the counting of the Jubilee. Now listen to this. When we came out of Egypt, we were told that when we enter the land of Israel, in other words, we have something to do yet. We have to enter the land. And when we enter the land, we are to count 7 years, and the 7th year is a Sabbath year. That year the land is to rest. We are not to plant, we are not to harvest, the land is to rest completely. Then we are to count 7 Sabbath years. That'll be the 49th year, and then the year after that is the Jubilee year, in which all the land goes back to the original owners. Now, every single year, the counting of the Omer is that microcosm. We do not know until the barley is Aviv when we are going to have the month of the Aviv and have Passover. Until we see the new moon appear and the barley is Aviv, we can't count and even find out when Passover is going to be for that year. But once we find out when it's going to be, and we find the weekly Sabbath during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, then the day after we count 7 Sabbaths, 7 sevens. And the day after will be Shavuot. It is a microcosm of the counting of the Jubilee years. Now, this is very important because this is what is going to take us into an understanding of where we are in history right now, because one of these countings has transpired, and we're going to see it. So there you have the basis of the astronomically corrected and agriculturally corrected biblical Hebrew calendar, and this is why you must understand this reckoning of time, because this is how the next years are going to play out for you. And so now we are going to step into the 3 days and the 3 nights. Okay. Oh boy. It's not supposed to be happening here. When the Pentium chip first came out, computer experts and mathematicians found that there was an error in the math coprocessor. After so many billions of computations, that the math coprocessor broke down, that the math did not work. And what would happen is this would show up on your screen. Now, sometimes when this happens with your computer, there's nothing you can do. I've had it testify to me many people who have thrown their computer away once this blue screen came up, and it never ever came back because there's an error in the math. It would not process anything correctly. You'd say, wait, I don't process billions of calculations. Oh, yes, you do. If you are manipulating a picture, if you're doing a vector-based program, if you're doing video, anything like that, you are computing just billions and billions of bits of information. And if there's an error in the math, then it won't process it correctly. There is only one sign that Yeshua said of his authenticity, one sign of his authority, and that is the Jonah code. He said that the sign of Jonah, that Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, in the grave. And there is no way that this one sign, in which we are told that Yeshua died on Good Friday and got up on Easter Sunday, no way that 3 days and 2 nights equals 3 days and 3 nights with a resurrection on the third day. There is a fatal error. And I submit to you that the one sign of Yeshua's authenticity is also the one sign that we have been given another Jesus, a false Jesus. One that some people say, what difference does it make that we can't count to 3? Many nights we have a lot of pastors come out to these, and I'm really your pastor's best friend, because the embarrassment of when the second graders come up after the Easter Sunday morning message and say, but pastor, you can't get 3 days and 3 nights between Good Friday and Easter Sunday. And, as we're feverishly shaking hands trying to get everyone out the door back home to eat their ham dinner as fast as possible, we know the embarrassment because we know we don't have an answer to it. And I've heard some pastors say, it doesn't make any difference. Yeshua said it dozens of times, it doesn't make any difference. Well, that person is absolutely true. It doesn't make any difference. If having a nice house, a good job, a car, having good schools for your children to go to and college, a retirement home for yourself, and then when it's all over, a 6-foot hole in the ground, if that's the goal, it doesn't matter. But if truth matters, if Yeshua's words matter, then these things matter. The one sign, we only got one, can we get it right? So to understand these things, we are going to take you into Yeshua's ministry, and this is where the excitement begins. Now, first of all, John 2 details the Messiah's first Passover after his ministry begins. You remember that he comes up to Jerusalem and he finds the money changers up on the Temple Mount, those who are buying and selling temple sacrifice animals, the doves, the goats, and the lambs, all of which were legal to be done down below off the Temple Mount. But the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, had given them permission to bring their wares up onto the Temple Mount. Yeshua got there just before the Feast of Passover, and he made a whip of cords, and he drove the animals off the Temple Mount, took the money changers' boxes and overthrew them, broke open the cages for the doves, and said, "Get these animals out of here. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise." He tore it up. And when he did this, immediately it says that then answered the Jews, "What sign do you show us, seeing that you do these things? We gave them the authority. We gave them permission to be up here. Who are you? What authority do you do this?" Now, there's something interesting here that you need to understand when you read the Gospel of John. Then answered the Jews. The Gospel of John, every time there is something negative that's being said, it says the Jews did this, the Jews did that, the Jews did something else. And, all you have to do is step back for a minute and read the rest of it and say, well, the people that are believing are Jews, the people who are getting healed are Jews, the disciples are Jews, Yeshua's a Jew. How come it's using Jews all in a negative context? It sounds very anti-Jewish when everybody's Jewish. Well, it's the first chapter of John that defines the very terms. Every time the term the Jews is used, it is always referring to the Pharisee religious leaders. Every single time. And so now just plug that information in so you see now we're talking about the Sanhedrin up on the Temple Mount. The Pharisee religious leaders who had given these people the authority to buy and sell up on the Temple Mount, I assert for the very same reason that you don't bring your own popcorn into the movie theater. because once you have a captive audience, it's always going to cost you more, and there's always a kickback involved. That's where the popcorn costs you a lot. If you buy them down in the marketplace where it's free trade, then, and bring up your animals up to the Temple Mount for the sacrifice, then you get a better bargain. But they had worked it out, and the Pharisees gave them permission, and so they said to him, "What sign do you show us, seeing that you do these things?" Yeshua said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up." Now, they didn't know that he was speaking of his body, but that's exactly what he's saying. You destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up. And exactly a year later, they did exactly that. They destroyed his body, and in 3 days he raised it up. This is the first time that he prophesied this. Now we continue. And Matthew says, "Then certain of the scribes and Pharisees said, 'Master, we would see a sign from thee.' Yeshua said unto them, 'An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, but there shall be no sign given unto it, but the sign of the prophet Jonah.'" So there is actually one sign, right? He said no sign but, and so we do have a sign, and what is it? It is a sign of the prophet Jonah. Now, he's not real happy with these people, an evil and adulterous generation. The word generation is offspring. Remember in another place it said, "You are of your father, the devil." Speaking of offspring, you're the offspring of an evil and adulterers. And then he said, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Can we all read it? 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And he continued on. The Pharisees also came with the Sadducees, tempting him, and desired that he would show them a sign from heaven. He gently and tenderly answered them so as not to hurt their feelings, and said unto them, see, you notice that's all in italics. See, whenever the King James translators added words and complete phrases that weren't in the text, they added them in italics. So I do the same thing. He answered them and said, "Hypocrites!" This is the Greek word hypocrite. It is the mask that one wears in Greek theater. I'm playing a role. I'm eliciting a response from you. I'm going to try to get you to buy into my world. And I do it by wearing a hypocrite, a mask. It says, I'm not playing your games. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. The word wicked is interesting because it's from the Old English word to twist fibers together to make a candle wick. And adultery has to do with the worship of pagan gods. And if what you do is twist this one sign around the worship of pagan gods, you will never, ever be able to count to 3. And that's what we've done. We've twisted this one sign around Good Friday and Easter Sunday, and we are completely lost because we can't read the Gospels and understand that Yeshua is fulfilling the feast of the Lord, not a pagan fertility rite. And he said, but no sign shall be given unto it, but the sign of the prophet Jonah, and he left them and departed. As if to say, if you people can't count to 3, I am out of here. And Luke, it reports, an evil generation seeks a sign, but there shall be no sign except the sign of Jonah the prophet. Just as Jonah was assigned to the Ninevites, so shall also the Son of Man be to this generation. Jonah was assigned to the Ninevites. So now we are going to break the Jonah code. In order to do that, we have to go back to the scriptures to find out what was going on in Jonah's life. Because it tells us that Jeroboam, this is the great-great-grandson of the Jeroboam that separated Israel from Judah. Remember, Jeroboam separated the 10 northern tribes from Rehoboam? Jeroboam then forbid any of the Israelites in the north to go down and celebrate the feast at Jerusalem. He then set up a golden calf at Bethel and at Dan. He then made a feast in the 8th month, like the Feast of Tabernacles, but it wasn't the Feast of Tabernacles. And we see that generations later, Jeroboam, his great-great-grandson, restored the coast of Israel from the entering of Hamath unto the sea of the plain, according to the word of Yahweh, God of Israel, which he spake by the hand of his servant Jonah the prophet. Now we see what takes place. Jonah was a prophet. Now, a prophet's job is not to foretell the future, okay? A prophet's job is to call people back to the Torah, back to the commandments. The Torah is described as the fence around God's people. If you're inside the fence, you're within the safety of God's instructions. You're not going to get hurt. False prophets are typified as those who come in and break the wall down, and so God's people go out wandering outside the fence, and they end up getting eaten by the wolves. A true prophet comes and stands in the breach, stands in the gap, and says, this is where the wall was. Everyone stay inside. In fact, there's nobody inside. All of you get back inside. Now, if you don't get back inside, if you don't obey the instructions, then I'm going to foretell your future, and it ain't going to be a pretty picture. That's a prophet's job. A prophet is not a fortune teller or a soothsayer. That's sort of modern prophets in America. You know, we receive an offering to release the anointing. We line up, and what do we hear? Nothing but soothing sayings about people's future fortunes. No one's being called back to be obedient to God's word. It's just, hey, you know, you're just going to live a prosperous life. It's only getting rosier from here. That's a fortune teller and a soothsayer. Jonah was a prophet. And it says that because he spoke the word, that Jeroboam acted on it, and part of the land of Israel was restored, from Hamath unto the sea of the plain. Now, what's the sea of the plain? The Sea of Galilee. The Sea of the Galilee region. Now, why is it called the Sea of the Galilee? Because in Hebrew, it's called the Kinneret. Why the Kinneret? Because Kinnor in Hebrew is harp. And this is a Kinnor right here. The Kinneret is the shape of a harp, just like this. That's why I put this up here for you. This is the Sea of Galilee. It's the Kinneret. It's the shape of a Kinnor. Okay, so I'm going to take you around the topography here for just a minute so that you get acquainted with it. This is the Mount Hermon is right up here. It is a snow-capped mountain in the wintertime, and the Dan River comes out of it, then goes into the Jordan, and the Jordan flows into the Kinneret right about here, right near Bethsaida. Okay? And then the Jordan flows out right down here and goes down to the Dead Sea. Right over here on this shore is Tiberias. Up here is Migdal, or the tower. Right here is Gennesar, Nath Gennesar. This is where Yeshua spent a good bit of time at Capernaum. This is Bethsaida right here. And over here we have the northernmost cities of the Decapolis, the Roman cities. Right up here is where I live. And this is the Golan Heights right here, and I live right across from the Golan Heights. And so we are going to use this to help understand Yeshua's travels and what he was doing.